right, we are back with Game 4 of the 2021 World Chess Championship. And in this game, Magnus Carlsen had white against Nepo. And this is more than likely going to be another quick video, as this was the type of game that, for instance, the first time I saw a Petroff used in a World Championship match was in the Kramnik-Leko match. And then, you know, I enjoyed it so much I used it as a sleep aid after that, to be completely honest. The Petroff is one of those super solid systems that I feel like it's a curl up in the ball type of opening. So we get e4, and according to Fischer, it was best by test, but I don't know. These days, things are starting to change, and I think d4 gets more imbalances, and it gives the opponent more opportunities to go wrong. So I'm hoping to see some more d4 games in this World Championship. And let's take a brief interlude, because I mean, as a chess player in my entire life, and I mean for at least 3 generations now, you've had people going, draws are going to be the death of chess. We need to change it up and do something different. No, we don't. Chess has been around for objectively 1.5 millennia, and still going. And it's going to be here long after I'm dead or anyone watching this video is dead. It's going to be okay. But when players choose to play very dry openings and go for lines, which there's no poison, no venom, everything just kind of smoothly gets a result, you're going to get a game like this when 2 very strong players are playing and neither one of them wants to take any big risks. So after e4, I took some time to do some research, and I was curious how often, because there was this big thing before the match, oh, I'm so excited to see an aggressive player finally go after Magnus in a World Championship. Yeah, okay. Against e4, Nepo has roughly 800 games in the database, with the Sicilian, specifically the Najdorf, popping up in roughly 500. He's played the French about 150 times, and e5 66 times, with the Petrov only occurring 12 times in his games. And it's typically known as a draw weapon for the most part. So, okay, I don't blame Nepo for making draws with black, but can't have it both ways. Can't be an aggressive Sicilian player looking to be dynamic and then do this when it's all on the line. You're either an aggressive player or you're not. And against d4, so we saw earlier d5 was played in the match, but Nepo has played d4, knight f6 in easily 90% of his games, with the follow-up of a Grunfeld being the main opening of choice. And we definitely didn't see that earlier. So far, Nepo has chosen with black to play the most solid systems available. And whose fault is it that there's draws? Just throwing that out there. Okay, so let's get back to the main game. And I find it interesting when we look at the other perspective that all this Carlsen has played before, of course, and this is an interesting moment because I feel that there's only one aggressive line versus the Petrov, and it's what I recommend my students to play here. And there's a game in the database from last year where Carlsen beat Caruana. And of the 5 games Carlsen has in the Petrov, his knight c3 move, he played the majority. And let me give a couple of brief lines here because it's far more interesting than the main game. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop e7. And one of the key things is you're able to quickly castle queenside and get an opposite side castling position. This position really made a strong impression on me the first time I deeply studied it, which after knight e5, h4 is Karyakin Kremenik Moscow 2010. And that game is nasty. If you're interested in this variation, definitely take a look at that. Coming back, the game that Carlsen played against Caruana, knight f6 was played, and you're going to get the same sort of theme that we saw with that h4. It just takes a bit more time as an opposite side castling position. You're going to be able to fight. And Carlsen ended up winning this game in 57 moves in 2020. So what happened in the main game? And I'll be honest, as soon as I saw d4, I cut the broadcast off because I knew there was no point in watching anymore. Like I said, I've used this as a sleep aid since the Kramnik-Leko match, and I knew what we were in store for as soon as I saw d4 in this position. Black definitely is doing just fine from a theoretical standpoint, and we get a very solid position. c4 to try to undermine the knight, c6, and this is all first choice moves in the database so far. Rook e1, and queen b3 is the second choice, but it was only by, say, 20 games. It's objectively quite a decent move. Knight c3, and we get a little bit of wood chopping, so to speak. b6 to protect the b7 pawn from attack. Take, take, get rid of your double pawn. You have the backwards pawn on c3 the rest of the game. Queen b5, keeping an eye on d5. And at this moment, black has fully equalized and has zero problems. This would be the point to start to attempt to press if there was one for black. Of course, queen takes d5 is met by bishop takes h2. Don't fall for the simple stuff. a4, looking to optimize the pawn structure. And it looks like white's got a good position here. I mean, I would love to play a move like bishop a3, get rid of the b, and then double up and play against this weakness on a7, as you got this great pawn doing this. And I really love this move by Nepo, as a5 says if you capture, which we'll look at, it's essentially a draw. If you don't capture, I could potentially have a dangerous pass pawn the rest of the game. So, very good move. That's, in my opinion, the only interesting point pretty much in the entire game. And if b takes a6, bishop a3, and knight c7, we see quickly that the knight on c7 is not easily harassed. It's hard to find targets here to mess with. Objectively, this is going to be an easy draw. After a5, knight h4 was played in the main game. g6 keeps the knight out of f5. And another interesting moment, g4 was played. And a lot of people go, well, we shouldn't move the pawns in front of the king. It's an endgame. There's no queens on the board. And g4 could be useful in holding back moves like f5, where we'll be able to break up the pawn structure. And if not, we can play g5 at some moment and really get a grip on the kingside structure. So another interesting move to restrict play. Knight g2. And here, rook fc8 was played in the main game, hitting the weak c-pawn. I felt like knight f6 is a bit more combative, where we get something similar to the main game, but there's definitely more play here. Start working with your passed pawn, stop the back rank nonsense. And it's a balanced position, but in my opinion, it's easier to play for black, especially with the bishop on h6. He is threatening back rank stuff, but he's out of play. And that pawn is very menacing, in my opinion. So after rook fc8, going after the pawn, bishop f4, very forcing play. Rook e7, bothering the knight, check, check. d5, of course, setting the obvious trap. A4, working with the passed pawn and securing the knight, just checking to see if black will do anything else. And then Carlsen forces a repetition. And it should be noted as well that it is Mighty Magnus's 31st birthday today, and chess players typically don't have the best results on their birthday. We'll call it distractions. So I don't question too much overall. Going for a line that he doesn't typically play that's quite solid. And it may be one of those situations that he didn't want to play what he typically plays, the more aggressive line that he had success with versus Caruana, because he's hoping in a future game that his boys, his seconds, can go to work on the Petrov and maybe find something interesting that they can come to the board with the next time Magnus has white. And you can definitely see in these first handful of games, there's still a lot of testing the water. And I am hoping and devoutly giving all energy to the idea that Nepo is going to start trying to play for a win with black in some of these games, and we'll get something interesting to look at. This happens at a lot of World Championship matches, and it's not a negative critique of either player, because if I was strong enough to choose openings that could force draws when I had black, I would I would definitely do it, especially in very strong tournaments and situations like this. A lot's on the line, and I just want to see some interesting chess. Like I said, 5 years since we've had a decisive game in a World Championship. Really hoping to see one very soon.